Okay, hello and welcome to our quarterly partner education webinar. We are going to be talking about trauma-informed care and customer service today. I am Lindsay Lyman. I'm the Community Empowerment Manager for the Food Bank of the Southern Interior. A lot of y'all know me because I started in agency services, and I have been here 9 years. And now I work in client engagement and advocacy and community education. So I'm here today to help folks learn about this trauma-informed care work that we've been delving into for a couple years now. And we also have Jackie Bogart, who I'm going to have introduce herself.
Thank you, Lindsay. I am Jackie Bogart, Community Empowerment Coordinator at the Food Bank. I've been there 1.5 years now, and was also there previously for 2 years as an Americo Vista.
Yeah, and Jackie's really been jumping into the trauma-informed care work as well. It's a big part of our client engagement work, of course, but we're finding it's just applicable across the board. So we're going to tell you a lot more about that today. And just to give you a little roadmap of where we're at, this is the plan for the quarterly partner education webinars for this year. And you can see, of course, we're somehow already in May. I'm not sure how, but we're already in May. And so today we're covering trauma-informed care, which is going along with our theme of linking agency capacity and client-driven services and good food for this year's webinars. So we already did our kind of client-centered services launch in February, and there was that impact grant with increasing hours and the amount of food and visits and home deliveries. For the webinar, there's not necessarily an impact grant per se, but you're going to be hearing more about this, providing funding for and access to trainings on trauma-informed care. So that's kind of the opportunity that's aligned with this webinar. And then in August, we'll be covering diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in November, we're going to be diving into community empowerment work more broadly. So we're going to kick it off with a poll, and I'm going to hand it over to Jackie to get us started.
Well, thank you. So first question is, do you know what trauma-informed care is? Next question is, what percentage of people in the U.S. have experienced trauma? And we will go over this the next few slides. And the last question, do you do any of the following at your pantry program? So for question number one, it looks like yes, 65% of you answered yes. 10% of you answered no, and maybe 25%. Next question, what percentage of people in the U.S. experience trauma? 30%. Yeah, I'm not seeing the answers to be able to.
It looks like 70% of this group wrote 70% of people in the U.S.
That's right.
It's confusing and then 10% of this group said 50% of the U.S. and 20% said 30% of the U.S.
Thank you, Kevin. Number three, do you do any of the following at your pantry program? 75% said creating a calm and inviting space. 50% said providing additional resources. 60% said asking clients for their feedback. And 45% said inviting clients to be volunteers. And I know for the most part, a lot of you probably are already doing this without even calling it trauma-informed care. So numbers might even be higher.
Great. Thanks everyone for getting that started with us. So we're going to jump into some content, and then we'll have time for a discussion, both in breakouts and as a full group.
Our values. For review, our values are integrity, respect, caring, learning, inclusion, and abundance. And each of these are prominently featured in the act of centering the client in our programs and our services. Here's what we're going to be up to during this webinar. We're going to talk about trauma-informed care and what it is, how the food bank is working on it, how do partners engage with it, and how to make it work for you. And then we're going to have, hopefully, a very robust group discussion. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
What is trauma? Trauma is defined as a traumatic event that is shocking, dangerous, or a scary experience that can affect people emotionally or physically. We talk about trauma as the event itself, as in the event is objectively traumatic or not. But in truth, it is the body and the brain's reaction to the event. Two people can experience the same event and it be traumatic for one, but not for the other, because one person might have less resilience factors than the other. Trauma-informed care is an approach that assumes a person is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. Trauma-informed care recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role trauma may play in an individual's life. It's important to note that this includes service staff and volunteers. This doesn't just pertain to clients, it is all of us. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris explains that chronic trauma throughout a childhood or lifetime is considered one of the greatest public health threats facing our nation today. Although this is important, we struggle with a common understanding of cause and impact. For those who have not experienced trauma, it is just as important to understand how it impacts our society as a whole and how it might impact your daily interactions with others.
The food bank cares about trauma-informed care for a few reasons. The first is that these are generally good principles to know for interacting with and building relationships with anyone, but specifically folks who have experienced some form of trauma. And it's absolutely pervasive in our society. To answer the poll question, at least 70% of the U.S. population has experienced trauma. The food bank is also committed to incorporating the expertise of people who have experienced food insecurity into our day-to-day decision making. This is because we know there's only so much that data and research can teach us. There's context only those who have experienced the issue at hand can provide that will deeply impact what we understand to be the best decision for the community. We also know that if people do not feel secure, there's no real chance of involving them in decision making on a deeper level. As can be seen on the chart here, there's a spectrum of community involvement with corresponding impact on the community. We may start off by simply informing clients of decisions, but we want to move more towards consulting with and involving clients in decision making and eventually collaborating and empowering. The foundation of this kind of relationship is trust and a sense of safety, which requires us to be trauma-informed in our interactions with clients. To give an overview of the principles involved in the trauma-informed care framework, we wanted to share what's known as the 5 R's. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, first we want to realize that trauma impacts our communities, even when it's not very apparent. Then we need to learn and be able to recognize the signs of trauma. And we're then able to respond using trauma-informed principles that we've learned and work toward building resilience by increasing proven protective factors, such as having a supportive person to turn to. Finally, we are then able to resist re-traumatizing folks in our interactions with them. You may be wondering what the food bank has done in regards to trauma-informed care to date. Here's a few things we wanted to share with you, and we plan to do plenty more moving forward and continue to learn as we move through the process. So first of all, the food bank's senior leadership team identified trauma-informed care as a priority that's been then filtered down through the rest of the organization. The community impact department employees took either a 1.5 hour or some of us a 10-hour training through Feeding America and Leah's Pantry. And we're now at the stage where we are able to introduce this to our network partners and have offer incentivized access to the Leah's Pantry training via Feeding America to you all. As with when we're learning anything new, it's possible we may feel resistant at first when we are being exposed to trauma-informed care concepts. We might find ourselves kind of putting up some walls, to the information that we are receiving. One of those thoughts might be, well, we're already nice to everyone. But there's a difference between being culturally nice and having a trauma-informed lens, which will help us be more present. So for instance, some people love hugs, and some people feel very uncomfortable with touching because of something they have experienced in the past. With a trauma-informed lens, we can remember to ask first if a hug would help instead of assuming that everyone wants to be touched. Another thought that might come up is, hey, I'm just here to give out food. And sure, we all are. That is a core part of our mission. But we will be most successful in serving the food insecure community members if we act in a manner that's truly welcoming, which means being trauma-informed. You also might think when you hear some of these thoughts and concepts, yeah, life is hard for everyone. It's true that everyone has experienced hardship. That is a part of life. And like we learned earlier, over 70% of people in the U.S. have experienced trauma. So having these concepts front of mind with a common understanding of trauma-informed care principles can just make everything a little easier when we're interacting with folks, whether they've experienced trauma or not. And finally, you might think, isn't trauma kind of a dramatic word? Isn't that, a dramatic way to talk about it? And The fact is we actually have a technical definition for trauma, which is a traumatic event is a shocking, dangerous, or scary experience that can affect people emotionally or physically. We talk about trauma as the event itself in our culture, as in the event is objectively traumatic or not. But in truth, it is the body and brain's reaction to the event that is the trauma. So two people can experience the same event and it could be traumatic for one and not for the other, because one person might have less resilience factors than the other. This concept of different people experiencing the same event and one experiencing it as traumatic and the other not has to do with something called the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance is the range of experiences we can have without experiencing hyperarousal and the feelings of anger, anxiety, hypervigilance, etc., nor the hypoarousal feelings of depression, shame, and disconnection. When we have more protective factors called resilience factors in this body of work, the bigger our window of tolerance can become. This means there's more things we can experience in the world and in life and still feel calm in our bodies and minds, the wider the window is. Another great thing that we learn about when we dive into trauma-informed care are the 6 key principles of trauma-informed care. And these are safety, meaning making spaces and interactions that feel physically, mentally, emotionally safe for folks. Trustworthiness and transparency, building that into our relationships. Peer support, which means having folks that are of a similar background and experience being able to support one another. Collaboration and mutuality. So from the food bank's perspective, when we're working with clients, we want to be coming at it from that mindset of collaboration. Empowerment, voice, and choice really just has to do with the person with lived experience feeling empowered, feeling as though they can share their voice and having a choice in the matter of, being part of the work and how they are part of it. And then finally, cultural, historical, and gender issues are always coming into play. So we need to keep those in mind as well.
So why is trauma-informed care important? Most folks have experienced trauma, like Jackie mentioned, and we also can build relationships on trust with this knowledge at hand. We're committed as a network to include clients' expertise, and respecting others and creating a dignified experience should be central to the work that we're doing. We're going to be moving into breakout groups here in a moment, but we wanted to give you a background, a little bit of a primer to think about some things before you get started in your smaller groups. You probably already incorporate a lot of trauma-informed care principles into your work, and likely without realizing it. How about you reflect on your typical program, distributions, and ask the following. How do you already create physical, emotional, and social safety in the environment that you work in, with your clients and also with your staff? And are there ways that you leverage the wisdom from your staff, your volunteers, and your clients? Have a think on that, and we'll get started in a second. For the real breakout questions, once you get into groups, we want you to discuss how you realized and recognized trauma in your distributions, your programs, or in your communities, and what stories of wisdom, creativity, or resourcefulness can you share about your clients or communities? We'll get you into those breakout groups in just a second.
I'm glad to have had that conversation with folks, and we are just gonna do another poll here and see where we're at. I'm thinking y'all can see that, and I'm gonna hand it over to Jackie to walk us through this poll.
Thank you, Lindsay. So first question, has your interest been piqued on this topic? Second question, what would you like to know more about? And third question, would you like to help with any specific topic?
All right, great.
So for question 1, has your interest been piqued on this topic? 91% of you said yes, and 9% said no. Number 2, what would you like to know more about? 48% said Leah's pantry training. 61% said what the food bank staff plans to do with trauma-informed care, and 52% said what other partners have done or are planning to do. Number 3, would you like to help with any specific topic? 22% said yes, 35% said no, and 43% said maybe.
All right, thanks everyone. So in terms of what other partners have done or are planning to do, hopefully you got into that in your breakout rooms to start. And we have some time now for a little more conversation. So you know what? I don't even need to have the slides up because we're just going to chat. So we just want to hear from y'all, you know, what reflections you have based on the information you've heard so far about trauma and trauma-informed care. If there's anything that stuck out to you from your breakout that you want to share. I know we had rich conversation in ours, and y'all are already doing a lot of these things, which is amazing. And so yeah, we'd just love to hear folks' thoughts on what you've heard so far today, and what you might want to learn moving forward about trauma and trauma-informed care for your work. Jump in as the spirit moves you.
What would be helpful to us would be, since we have a lot of volunteers who work throughout the week, it would be helpful to have some kind of pointer sheet, some examples of things that happen. I mean, in our group, Pam had mentioned different people coming through, one person talking about breast cancer and various traumas, not having enough food on the table, their food stamps gone dead or lost food stamps, all those kinds of issues that really come before our volunteers on a regular basis. So it would probably be helpful. It would be helpful to us if we had some pointers. And we typically meet a couple times a year with all of our pantry volunteers and substitutes. And it would be an opportune time for us to talk about those pointers and have people share their experiences, etc. But, these are some ways that you can respond when such and such happens.
Great idea, like a tip sheet or just some of those key principles or concepts to keep in mind when you're interacting with folks. That's such a good idea. I think that's definitely something we could create or might already be out there that we could just find and share with y'all. Great.
Some of the things that we talk about in our group is, like sometimes people have anxiety over just simply doing paperwork, or you don't know what you're going through when they come in. And sometimes it's not all necessarily 1, 2, 3. I know sometimes we're there at a pantry to serve food, but sometimes we have to stop and say, okay, this person might need an extra 20 minutes, an extra half an hour, an extra 45 minutes, maybe take them to a private area so that, they're not just out in the open. Maybe they might even say more while they're in a private location. And you might have to refer them to another agency or just make sure that we are aware of what is going on. And it's not always, oh, you're fine, give them a hug and off you go. Sometimes you need more time to help the client.
Yeah, Nordia, I love that. It reminds me of how people talk about our medical system, right? That like a lot of times we go into our doctor's offices and they want you in and out in 15 minutes. They don't really have time to really hear you out because of just how the structure's been set up. But what happens when people or doctor's offices, pantries, whatever you're working at, builds out their capacity to have that time to spend more time with people and what you can learn and help with. But also, the question from how can the food bank support y'all is, what do you need to make that happen? Do you need, more volunteers? Do you need, what do you need to make that possible for your program? And maybe we could step in some form or fashion.
I'm saying doing all these trainings, I'm trying to, get my staff in the mindset of, making sure that, we are taking those extra steps to assist the clients. And, even when you go to deliver food, sometimes and folks want to tell you thanks and kind of give you like a little backdrop of their story, we have to stay there and listen and hear them, because they want to tell you thanks. Like I was saying, I had a couple that I went to deliver to. The house was gorgeous. They had, it's beautiful. But he was just telling me that, his wife had just lost her leg and, they're going through all these crises and they really needed the food to help them. And hadn't I spent that little time talking with him, I would have known his backstory, so sometimes just by being there and listening to them and hearing them and helps them to realize, hey, they're not alone, that, they have a support system out there that they can utilize whenever they need.
Right. Yeah, that's just going to allow you to serve someone so much better when you look at all that background. The other thing that we should say is that I think I mentioned it at the top, but I'm not sure that we made it super clear. The offering to the agency and partner network is to participate at no cost to your agency in the Leah's Pantry, which you can, we'll probably be sending out a follow-up email with, just a link so you can learn more about them. But it's a organization that offers these trauma-informed care trainings that a lot of food bankers have now gone through. Just about everybody, I think, either the shorter or the long 10-hour version. And this is a self-paced training where you can do even, 10, 15 minutes at a time. You watch videos, you read something, it's kind of multifaceted, multimedia type of training. And so we're hoping to have a lot of partner agency and program folks participate in that and be able to learn more about this. And then the question is, if you're interested in that training, if you're able to take it, what are your thoughts about how you might be able to keep this information top of mind, implement some changes maybe based on it, and how would this, how would the partner agency and program folks like to be, thanks Terry, like to be in touch and sharing best practices, right? So if there's any support that you need from us on that, but so if you are able to take the training, how will you keep it top of mind? What might you need to implement changes, and how do you want to swap stories with others, your peers in the emergency food network?
Lindsay, can you talk about the 10 to 15 minute aspect of that training?
Yes. So that's just to say it's meant to be, it can be bite-sized. So it's an hour and a half long training, but you don't have to sit down and do it all in one chunk. So we know that y'all are really busy and you've got a lot going on. So, if you're able to devote, 15 minutes a week, and do it that way for a set period of time, then you'll be able to work through the content. So however it's going to work for people, you can do it all at once if you just want to sit down and focus. And but we've certainly had staff that have done it a little more piecemeal, kind of absorb the information, right, and then come back to it a little bit further down the road. So it's optional, however you want to, whichever way you'd like to do it. So it's actually built to be in modules. And so you might just choose, okay, today I'm doing 1 and 2, which will probably add up to be something like, 20, 30 minutes. And then you'll just log back in and you'll be able to pick up where you left off and start on module 3, for instance. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that, knowing when to refer out, like what's within your scope, and either having like a list in your back pocket, so to speak, of local resources, or just knowing like what's outside your sphere, going beyond like listening and supporting, and where to bring in, whether it's a mental health professional, or maybe somebody needs like support with like their little kids or whatever it may be.
Right. And that's different at each agency or program, right? Because some, folks like Alicia and Sister Mary, y'all are caseworking all the time. You're handling all these different aspects of people's lives, and you have experience in that and education that I know supports you in that. And then other folks, do have a more narrow scope, and that's, fine too. So just knowing where those boundary lines lie, I've found can be really helpful to avoiding burnout too, right? When we talk about trauma-informed care, like Jackie said, we're talking about ourselves too. It's all of us. So even just being exposed to a lot of these stories all the time, that's traumatic, or can be. And so knowing where those boundary lines are, like, okay, this is outside of what I can help with. Here's someone who can help. And that's a way to, kind of insulate yourself even just a little bit from some of the more tricky effects of being out there sort of in the trenches with folks all the time, as y'all are. Any other reflections on what we've talked about so far today, or questions about the training? Or
I would just do another plug here, Lindsay, if I may. And Lindsay shared it earlier about how there is not a collating impact grant with this particular webinar, but we do have a leadership training fund available. And this does not have a due date. This is rolling, so it's always open. If you find a relevant training that has to deal with trauma-informed care or hospitality, or something that's going to help you and your volunteers and staff do your work better, best, or learn something new, apply and send it in, and we will review it and see if we can support you with that. I know there's a few agencies that have just recently taken advantage, and we want you to be able to support your staff and volunteers with training opportunities. So we set aside some funding for it. Please take advantage. And then I also put in the chat a short little video if you guys have time. It's on empathy to directly relate to the comment that Bree had about how best to respond. And it's by Brene Brown,
who makes amazing content. Anything she creates is probably useful for our work. Absolutely. Jackie, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you wanted to chime in with or add here.
Yes, I just do want to mention that as we saw, 70% of people have experienced trauma. So this, doesn't have to be relevant only to a pantry or a program. And having this knowledge can help you in your personal lives as well, because more than likely, someone who has been through some trauma, whether a lot or a little, but it can always help. It can never hurt to have this information.
And even for ourselves, right, to understand like our own responses to things of like, oh, I got really upset when somebody did this or said this. Wonder what that's about. Oh, maybe this is a trauma response, right? And just to be clear, so the more information will be coming out about this shortly, but the Leah's Pantry training is going to be available to everybody at no cost, and that's through a partnership with Feeding America. And then on top of that, if you are interested in any additional training, like Amanda said, if you find them, we'll probably be sending out some resources and that kind of thing too, but we could help you cover the cost of those kinds of things through what Amanda was talking about. Well, thanks everybody. You get half an hour back of your day. So who doesn't love that? Thank you so much for joining us. This recording will be available shortly. And there's going to be a lot more information coming out about this in the coming weeks and months. So keep an eye out for that. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.